Hello and welcome, and in this video I'm going to discuss the big letter J that was placed in Jewish passports as from 1938, and I am going to show who, or what the point, which country was responsible for that. Now, on the 5th of October 1938, Nazi Germany introduced a requirement whereby Jews had to have their passports stamped with a big letter J in red ink. Now, I've seen it said in many serious books and indeed on documentaries that this was a demand placed upon Nazi Germany by Switzerland, and in some cases even by Sweden, so that those countries would know who was entering their countries. This claim originally comes from a Swiss newspaper article, and it particularly blames the head of the Federal Aliens Police. Although here I'm going to demonstrate that that isn't exactly true. So it's like a myth-busting presentation by me, if you like. But this myth isn't entirely a myth, as you will see. The behaviour of Switzerland towards refugees, I would say, at best, was very immoral. From the end of the First World War, Swiss refugee and immigration policy was shaped by fears of demographic, economic and political destabilization, and that is to be understood in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. No country wanted to be in a situation where it was importing problems. Now, a central figure in Switzerland towards its policy towards immigration was Heinrich Rothmund, who from 1919 onwards held senior positions in the Federal Aliens Police. He played a decisive role in drafting the law on residence and settlement between 1929 and 1931, and this embedded a restrictive and discretionary approach to immigration into Swiss law. Hitler came to power on the 30th of January 1933, and this led to a wave of refugees leaving Nazi Germany. Above all, these were political opponents of the regime, but it needs to be pointed out that there were a lot of political opponents to the regime. The Federal Department of Justice and Police under Federal Councillor Heberlin responded on the 31st of March 1933 with a directive concerning the entry of Israelites into Switzerland. Rothmund clarified this instruction shortly afterwards. Jewish refugees were to be granted only temporary refuge, while communists were to be turned back unless they faced direct personal danger. Of course, you had to prove that they faced direct personal danger. All communists faced direct personal danger, but proving that, well, how were they going to do it? From the outset, therefore, Jewish refugees were treated not as political refugees, but as a separate category whose presence was regarded in Switzerland as being problematic. The situation intensified after the annexation of Austria in March 1938, which triggered a sharp increase in Jewish flight towards Switzerland. It needs to be pointed out that the per capita amount of Jews in Austria was much greater than it had been in Germany. And at the International Évian Conference held from the 6th of July to 15th of July 1938, Switzerland presented itself as a transit country. But the conference failed when no state agreed to accept substantial numbers of refugees. In the aftermath, the Swiss Federal Council concluded that Switzerland must actively limit refugee inflows. In this climate, Switzerland pressed for the introduction of visa requirements for German nationals, as it had already done so for Austrians until that country had been until that country had ceased to exist. This demand, intended to control immigration pressure, provided decisive for the latter emergence of the J stamp. German authorities objected arguing that a general visa requirement would also inconvenience non-Jewish Germans who had no intention of emigrating. They might just be going there on a holiday or for a business trip or for to see family or something else. On the 16th of May 1938, Swiss envoy Paul Dinischer suggested limiting visa requirements to non-Jewish German nationals, to non-Aryan German nationals, primarily Jews. Negotiations between Bern and Berlin followed in August and September of 1938. On the 22nd of August 1938, Rothmund proposed a passport endorsement for all German emigrants, carefully formulated to avoid explicitly singling out Jews. When German officials floated the alternative of marking Jewish passports so that Switzerland could dispense with general visas, Rothmund acknowledged the technical feasibility, but warned that such a solution was politically dangerous. His objections intensified when on the 7th of September 1938, the German Foreign Office formally proposed marking Jewish passports with a red J. Rothmund objected on two grounds. First, that reciprocity would require Switzerland to mark the passport of Swiss Jews, which he deemed unacceptable. And secondly, that the refugee problem extended beyond Jews to political and religious opponents of Nazism. He warned that accepting such a scheme would isolate Switzerland internationally. I think that one should ask, why was this even necessary, given that as of the 17th of August 1938, Jews were forced to adopt the given names of Sarah or Israel, and those names would be in passports issued after that date. Despite these objections, negotiations continued. At the end of September 1938, German official Werner Best, who later was to have a career in Denmark amongst other places, and I'll come on to him on a different video, he informed the Swiss representatives that Germany had decided to implement two measures under the Nuremberg race laws: the marking of domestic identity papers of non-Aryans and the issuance of specially marked passports for Jews authorized to emigrate. Germany abandoned its demand that Swiss Jews' passports be stamped. On the 5th of October 1938, Nazi Germany issued a decree introducing the red J stamp in all Jewish passports. Now, although the initiative originated with German authorities, Switzerland formally accepted the arrangement. Federal Councillor Motta and Swiss envoy Hans Fröhlicher, who was ambassador in Berlin, pressed for agreement, and the Federal Council approved it, despite Rothmund's reservations. The result was that German Jews could enter Switzerland only if their J-marked passports already contained a Swiss visa issued by a Swiss representation abroad. Switzerland itself didn't mark Jewish passports, but it explicitly relied on the Nazi German marking system to enforce its exclusionary policy. In practice, Jews were generally not recognized as political refugees and were refused entry without prior authorization, even when they faced imminent danger. With the outbreak of war, refugee policy hardened further. The Federal Council decree of the 17th of October 1939 distinguished between political refugees and emigrants, a classification left largely to the discretion of the aliens police. Entry visas were issued only if departure from Switzerland were guaranteed. After the general mobilization of Switzerland in May 1940, all visas required advance approval by the immigration police, although this was later partially relaxed under political pressure. In March 1940, male emigrants were permitted to work and were placed in labour camps administered by the Swiss police. As pressure mounted against Jews, deportations to the east began, and pressure, therefore, was more on the Swiss border. After an inspection along the Jura border, Rothmund ordered the closure of the frontier to non-political refugees on the 13th of August 1942, citing Federal Council policy. And remember what was happening then. This was at the very height of the Holocaust. August 1942, you've got the trains leaving the Warsaw Ghetto amongst many other places going to Treblinka. Trains going to Belzec, going to Sobibor, and also mass shootings taking place in the Soviet Union and territories had been occupied previously by the Soviet Union. So we have this absolutely the height of the Holocaust. So this decision was approved by Federal Councillor Eduard von Steiger. Rothmund argued that Switzerland, as an island in Europe, could not absorb hundreds of thousands of Jews, and that priority must be given to refugees already admitted. Public outrage forced a partial relaxation of rejection practices on the 23rd of August 1942. But by the end of the war, at least 20,000 people had been turned back or handed over to Nazi authorities despite being in mortal danger. And what happened to these people is something that perhaps needs more work to actually be done on it. The legal distinction between military and civilian refugees enabled discretionary and often lethal decisions. Escaped Polish and Soviet forced labourers were routinely returned to Germany until 1944, and despite them also facing dangers which was absolutely comparable to those of Jewish refugees. After the war, Switzerland's refugee policy came under sustained criticism. In 1954, the magazine Der Schweizerische Beobachter wrongfully accused Rothmund of having initiated the J-stamp, triggering public outrage and contributing to his resignation in December 1954. By this time, of course, he was 66 years old. He'd been in the job for well over half of his life, and so therefore he probably was ready for retirement anyway. The Federal Council commissioned Professor Karl Ludwig to investigate Swiss refugee policy. His report was published in 1957 and reissued in 1997. It demonstrated that the accusation rested on misinterpretation. Subsequent research has confirmed that while Switzerland accepted and exploited the J-stamp, its introduction was that of Nazi Germany, and it was done in order to avoid a general Swiss visa requirement. In 2002, the Independent Commission of Experts, Switzerland's Second World War, concluded that Swiss refugee law during the war was incompatible with the rule of law. While Rothmund's anti-Semitic views were well documented, the Commission and later scholarship established that responsibility for the stamp and the broader refugee regime lay primarily with the Federal Council and Swiss diplomatic representatives in Berlin, and I will come on to that subject in a different video. Rothmund ultimately implemented decisions taken above him, resigning himself to policies he had initially opposed. The J-stamp thus emerged from a convergence of German racial policy and Swiss exclusionary refugee control. Switzerland didn't invent the stamp, but it knowingly relied upon it to restrict Jewish entry. This entanglement, administrative, political and moral, is, I think, central to Switzerland's historic responsibility for the fate of those turned away at its own borders. Now, I would point out one thing, and I think this is worth mentioning, and Rothmund himself did mention Switzerland as an island. Switzerland was completely surrounded. So it had fascist Italy to the south, which was undoubtedly was threatened by Mussolini wanted to annex the Italian-speaking cantons of Switzerland. So we've got Nazi Germany in the north, which had showed itself to be extremely aggressive towards all of its neighbours, except for Switzerland. And then there was Vichy France for a time until it was occupied in November 1942 by Nazi Germany. But there was no way out of Switzerland, if you like. There was no way you could get out without going through either Nazi Germany or Mussolini's Italy or Vichy France from 1942. So it was under a lot of pressure. So that I think also does need to be borne in mind. I mean, Switzerland did have to do things such as it had to observe the blackout, and this was demands placed on it from Germany, so that the Swiss cities wouldn't actually guide British and American bombers. Anyway, I've done other things related to Switzerland in the Second World War, so you'll find that on this, and on the First World, in fact, you'll find that on this channel. I upload every day at 2000 hours because I'm based in Poland and in Germany. Well, now, presently, I'm in the United Kingdom, but I'm normally in Poland and in Germany. I do longer documentary style videos like this, or this length of video, or chat like this on Tuesdays and Fridays, and other days I upload, as a rule, short videos up to 3 minutes in length, but I might even do longer ones, sometimes depends how I'm feeling, or I might suddenly decide I'm going to do a live chat, and that gives you the opportunity to sort of say things at the same time. I try to be present all the premieres. Well, sometimes I don't make it, but if you can be at a premiere 2000 hours, always on Tuesdays and on Fridays, then that'll give you the chance to chat in real time with me and other users. There's also a membership of this channel that costs £5, €6 or $6, and that'll give you access currently to more than 800 videos, which I have done. Admittedly, most of them are quite short, but there are some longer ones, like the size of this as well. So for the moment, from me in the United Kingdom, thanks for watching, and bye for now.